The metallic tang of ozone and blood filled the air. Sasuke's hand, still crackling with the dying sparks of the Chidori, trembled slightly, though his expression remained a mask of cold indifference. The strike hadn't been fatal. He had pulled back at the last millisecond, or perhaps her instinctive flinch had saved her, but it had torn through her shoulder, leaving a jagged, smoking wound. Sakura didn't clutch the injury. She didn't fall to her knees. Instead, she took a step forward, the smell of her own burnt skin grounding her in a way no lecture ever could. "You know what? It was supposed to hurt, Sasuke," she said, her voice eerily calm. A sharp, sarcastic laugh escaped her lips, a sound so hollow it seemed to echo off the fog-covered water beneath the bridge. She kept walking until she was inches from him, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes, usually filled with a soft, yearning warmth, were now glassy with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. The emerald green was turning into something harder, flint. "Is this what you really want, Sasuke? Tell me," she demanded, her voice rising not in anger, but in a desperate need for finality. "Hurt me more. Make it clear to me. If the girl who loved you for years is just an obstacle to be cleared, then finish it. Give me a reason to never look back." Sasuke didn't flinch. He didn't look at the blood soaking her pink tabard. He looked through her, as if she were a ghost haunting a path he had already moved past. "You're still talking about feelings," he said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal silk. "That's your weakness, Sakura. You're an annoyance from a past I've already burned. I didn't miss your heart because I hesitated. I missed because you aren't worth the precision." He stepped closer, his Sharingan spinning with a cold, rhythmic cruelty. "You want clarity? You are nothing to me. You are a memory of a village I despise, and every time you cry, you remind me why I left. If you stay in front of me, I won't just hurt you. I'll erase you." The words hit harder than the lightning chakra ever could. Inside Sakura, something didn't just break. It solidified. The agonizing heat in her chest began to cool into a thick, impenetrable frost. She didn't sob. She didn't beg. She simply stepped back, the light in her eyes dimming until they were as opaque as his. The first layer of the wall was built on the realization that he wasn't lost. He was gone. The second layer, cemented by his words, was the realization that the Sasuke she loved had never truly existed in the way she imagined. "I see," she whispered. The sarcasm was gone, replaced by a terrifying neutrality. She reached up, wiped a stray drop of blood from her cheek, and turned her back on him. She didn't run away. She walked toward Kakashi and Naruto, her posture straight, her hand finally glowing with a steady, clinical green light as she began to heal her own wound. She didn't look back at the Uchiha. For the first time in her life, the silence behind her didn't feel like a void. It felt like freedom. The air on the bridge turned heavy, the sound of the rushing water below suddenly amplified in the silence. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, his Sharingan tracking the subtle shift in Sakura's stance. He had expected her to crumble, to weep, or to be paralyzed by the shock of his cruelty. He hadn't expected her to find her voice. "With all the strength you thought you had," Sakura repeated, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration. "You never actually tried to understand, Sasuke." She didn't wait for his retort. She didn't wait for him to call her a nuisance again. Sakura lunged. It wasn't the desperate, flailing attack of a heartbroken girl. It was the calculated strike of a medic who knew exactly where the human body was most fragile. Sasuke moved to parry, his movements fluid and arrogant, but he miscalculated the sheer pressure of her resolve. When her fist connected with his forearm, the ground beneath them didn't just crack. It shattered. The shockwave traveled up his arm, rattling his teeth. "You think your hatred makes you deep?" she spat, her green eyes burning with a cold, newfound clarity. "It makes you simple. It makes you predictable." She swung again, a horizontal kick aimed at his ribs that forced him to leap backward. She was breathing heavily, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer weight of the emotional armor she was welding into place. With every strike, she felt a piece of her old self, the girl who saved his seat at the academy, the girl who practiced her confession in the mirror, shrivel and die. Sasuke landed gracefully, but his breath was hitched. He looked at her, truly looking at her for the first time in years, and saw the wall she was building. It wasn't a wall of fear. It was a wall of indifference. "You're pathetic," Sasuke hissed, though his hand drifted toward the hilt of his kusanagi. "Analysis won't save you from the reality of power." "Power!" Sakura let out another short, jagged laugh. She stood amidst the rubble of the bridge, her medical chakra flickering around her hands like a ghostly flame. "You've traded everything for power, and yet you're still a slave to a dead man's ghost. You aren't the only one who can be cold, Sasuke. I'm done trying to reach you. From now on, I'm only going to outrun you." The pain in her heart was still there, a dull, throbbing ache behind the wall, but she pushed it down, burying it under layers of iron-hard discipline. She realized then that to survive him, she had to stop treating him like a person and start treating him like a target. She centered her chakra, her gaze locking onto his with a clinical detachment that mirrored his own. The girl who loved Sasuke Uchiha was dead. In her place stood a shinobi of the leaf, and she was no longer pulling her punches. "Come on then," she whispered, the wind whipping her short hair across her face. "Show me that power you traded your soul for. Let's see if it's enough to keep me down this time." The bridge groaned under the weight of their exchange. Sakura moved like a blur of pink and white, her movements stripped of all hesitation. Each time her fist struck the stone or Sasuke's guard, the impact sent a shockwave through the air, but the true damage was internal. Every time she saw his face, the cold, angular features of the boy she had once adored, it felt like a fresh needle piercing her heart. The wall she was building wasn't a shield against pain. It was a dam, holding back a flood of agony that threatened to drown her. To keep the wall standing, she had to strike harder. Sasuke's vision was swimming, the world turning into a red-tinted smear from the overuse of his eyes against Danzo. He drew his kusanagi blade, the steel whistling as it sliced the air. He lunged, a lethal thrust aimed at her shoulder, but Sakura didn't retreat. She stepped into his guard, grazing the blade with her side to deliver a concentrated, chakra-enhanced punch to his chest. "You're wide open!" she screamed, her voice cracking with the strain of holding her emotions at bay. Sasuke coughed, the air leaving his lungs as he was sent skidding back, his heels digging into the stone. His eyes bled into the Mangekyo Sharingan, the strain causing blood to leak down his cheek like a macabre tear. "Enough of this," he growled, his voice rasping. Purple ribs of ethereal chakra began to manifest around him, the beginnings of Susanoo. The pressure was immense, crushing the very air out of Sakura's lungs. The sight of it, this ultimate manifestation of his hatred, was the final brick in her wall. She realized he was willing to use a god-killing power on the girl who used to bring him flowers. The pain reached a crescendo, a blinding white heat in her chest that felt like her heart was physically tearing in two. As she charged one last time, her fist glowing with a terrifying amount of chakra, she wasn't just trying to hit him. She was trying to break the bond that was killing her. Just as the purple fist of the Susanoo swung forward and Sakura's chakra-laden strike accelerated toward it, two shadows blurred into the center of the bridge. "Sakura, stop!" Naruto slammed into the space between them, his hand catching Sakura's wrist. The force of her momentum nearly threw him off balance, his eyes wide with horror at the raw, jagged energy she was radiating. Simultaneously, Kakashi appeared in front of Sasuke, his Raikiri active not to attack, but to parry the Susanoo's crushing blow. The collision of forces created a vacuum of sound before exploding outward, shattering the remaining railings of the bridge. Naruto held onto Sakura's arm, his voice trembling. "Sakura-chan, your hand, you're shaking." Sakura didn't look at Naruto. She was staring at the ground, her breathing ragged. A single heavy tear finally escaped, hitting the dust, the last one she would allow herself for a long time. "Let go, Naruto," she said. Her voice was no longer sarcastic or angry. It was flat, empty. He made his choice. I finally made mine. Kakashi, standing guard between his two students, looked back at Sakura over his shoulder. He saw the smoking Chidori wound on her shoulder and the hollow look in her eyes, and for the first time, the legendary copy ninja felt a chill of genuine failure. The Team 7 bond hadn't just cracked, it had been pulverized. Sasuke stood amidst his flickering purple shroud, his hand covering his eyes as the blindness began to take hold. Yet he still looked at the three of them like they were insects. "You should have stayed out of this, Kakashi," Sasuke spat, blood staining his teeth. She was finally becoming interesting in her despair. The hollow sound of her laughter was more jarring than the explosion of their clashing chakra. It wasn't a laugh of madness or even of bitterness. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had spent years investing in a currency that no longer existed. "This has been such a waste," she whispered, her voice carrying over the crackle of Sasuke's fading Susanoo and the rush of the river. "Of my time, of my heart, of everything." She looked at her hands, one stained with the blood from the Chidori wound he'd carved into her, the other glowing with the remnants of the power she had honed just to keep up with them. "I am done." The declaration wasn't a surrender to him. It was a resignation from the role she had played her entire life. She took one step back, then another, her eyes never leaving Sasuke's bleeding, blurred gaze. The wall was finally complete. It was cold, thick, and silent. Behind it, the girl who had loved the Uchiha was buried deep under the rubble of the bridge. The adrenaline that had been suturing her together suddenly evaporated. The jagged wound on her shoulder, cauterized by lightning but deep, began to bleed through her tunic in earnest. The world tilted. The gray sky and the fading purple glow of the Susanoo swirled into a muddy charcoal. As her knees buckled, her vision tunneled. She didn't reach out for Naruto, who was shouting her name in a panic. She didn't look at Sasuke one last time for a sign of regret. She simply let go. Before she could hit the cracked stone, Kakashi was there. He caught her with a practiced, somber gentleness, his arms supporting her back as her head fell against his flak jacket. "Sakura!" Naruto cried out, reaching for her, his face a mask of terror. "She's alive, Naruto," Kakashi said, his voice heavy with a grief that went beyond physical injury. He looked down at his student. Even in unconsciousness, her face wasn't peaceful. Her brow was furrowed, and her jaw remained set in that new, hardened line. She looked older, but she's reached her limit, in more ways than one. Kakashi looked up at Sasuke across the gap. The Uchiha stood still, his Sharingan fading back to black as his vision failed him, his hand clutching his face. For a fleeting second, the coldness in Sasuke's eyes flickered, not out of love, but perhaps out of a strange, unsettling recognition. He had wanted to break her, but looking at her limp form in Kakashi's arms, he realized he hadn't broken a victim. He had forged an enemy. "Take her and go," Sasuke said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The next time we meet, that wall she's built won't be enough to save her." Kakashi tightened his grip on Sakura, pulling her closer to his chest. "It wasn't built to save her from you, Sasuke," Kakashi replied, his tone chillingly sharp. "It was built to save her from herself. And you've lost the only person who would have ever died to bring you home." While Kakashi remained behind to tend to the unconscious Sakura, Naruto's grief for his friend's shattered heart transformed into a roar of primal fury. He didn't just want to save Sasuke anymore. He wanted to force him to look at the wreckage he had left behind. The air over the samurai bridge grew heavy, saturated with the acrid scent of ozone and the metallic tang of blood. Naruto didn't move at first. He simply stared at the spot where Sakura had fallen. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The bond that had held Team 7 together, the glue of Sakura's relentless, agonizing hope, had finally dissolved. When Naruto looked back at Sasuke, his eyes weren't just the swirling crimson of the Nine Tails. They were wet with a clarity he'd never possessed before. "You think you're the only one who knows what it's like to be alone?" Naruto's voice was a low, vibrating growl that shook the very stones of the bridge. "You think the world owes you this blood because of what happened to the Uchiha?" Sasuke's Susanoo flared, a skeletal ribcage of purple chakra manifesting as a shield. "You know nothing of my brother's pain." You know nothing of the choice the village forced upon him. I know everything, Naruto roared, his chakra flaring into a shroud of golden orange. I know Itachi loved this village more than his own life, but he loved you more than his own soul. He threw away his honor to keep you alive, and you're using that gift to spit on his grave. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, the Mangekyo spinning violently. Don't you dare speak his name. I have to, because you're making his sacrifice a joke. Naruto took a step forward, the water beneath his feet boiling. I understand, Sasuke. I understand the hate. If the roles were reversed, if it was me losing everything, I might be standing right where you are. Naruto paused, his gaze softening into something far more dangerous than anger. Pity. But Itachi didn't die so you could become a monster. He died so you could be a shinobi of the leaf. Look at Sakura-chan. Naruto gestured wildly toward her limp form in Kakashi's arms, the Chidori wound still weeping crimson. Look at what you did to the one person who never stopped believing in you. You didn't just kill Danzo today, Sasuke. You killed the only home you had left to go back to. Sasuke didn't wait for another word. He lunged. The Chidori screamed, 1,000 birds chirping in a discordant, lethal chorus. Naruto met him head-on, not with a Rasengan, but with a bare-handed strike bolstered by the fox's shroud. The impact sent a shockwave through the canyon. They traded blows in a blur of motion, a desperate, messy brawl that lacked the elegance of their childhood rivalry. It was a fight between a man trying to burn the world and a man trying to douse the flames with his own blood. I'll break those eyes of yours if I have to, Naruto yelled, catching Sasuke's wrist. I'll drag you back to the village in chains if that's what it takes to make you wake up. There is no back. Sasuke spat, his Susanoo arm slamming Naruto into the bridge's railing. There is only the truth. Just as Naruto gathered chakra for a final, decisive Rasengan, one intended to shatter the Susanoo's defense. The ground beneath them buckled. A pale, leafy mass erupted from the stone. White Zetsu emerged, his voice mocking and sing-song. Now, boys. We can't have you killing each other yet. A swirling vortex appeared in the air, and the masked figure of Tobi stepped out of the vacuum. Enough, Sasuke. You've exhausted your eyes, and the Ninetales is becoming problematic. Get out of my way, Sasuke growled, his vision blurring, blood leaking from his tear ducts. The strain of the Susanoo and the blows from Sakura and Naruto were finally taking their toll. You've made your point, Tobi replied calmly. He looked over at Kakashi, who was still shielding the unconscious, wounded Sakura. The girl is broken. The bond is severed. You've won your freedom, Sasuke. Don't throw it away on a sentimental grudge match. Naruto lunged, his hand outstretched. I'm not letting you take him. But the vortex was already pulling them in. Sasuke looked at Naruto one last time. Not with the burning hatred he'd shown moments ago, but with a hollow, haunted void. He looked at the blood on his own hands, Sakura's blood, then at her distant, limp form. For a split second, the wall Kakashi mentioned seemed to reflect in Sasuke's own failing eyes. We will meet again, Naruto, Tobi whispered as they vanished. On the battlefield of a world that actually makes sense. The bridge went silent, save for the rushing river and Naruto's heavy, ragged breathing. He fell to his knees, his knuckles raw and his heart heavier than it had ever been. He had understood Sasuke, but it hadn't been enough to save him. Kakashi walked over, Sakura still cradled against his chest. He placed a hand on Naruto's shaking shoulder. He's gone, Naruto. I told him. Naruto whispered, his voice cracking. I told him I understood. Why wasn't it enough? Because understanding the darkness doesn't mean you can pull someone out of it, Kakashi said, looking down at the scarred shoulder of his student. Sometimes they have to want to see the light themselves. And right now, Sasuke is choosing to be blind. The war was a blur of dust, ash, and the stifling pressure of godlike chakra. For Sasuke, every movement was calculated, every strike a step toward the revolution. He intended to birth from the graveyard of the old world. But throughout the chaos, the rebirth of the Ten Tails, the fall of Obito, and the arrival of Kagaya. There was a jarring variable he hadn't accounted for: the silence of Sakura Haruno. During the battle against Kagaya, Sasuke moved with the cold efficiency of a predator. He saw Sakura jumping into the fray, her strength shattering the earth and her healing keeping the alliance tethered to life. But she never looked at him. Not once. When they were separated in the desert dimension, and she worked with Obito to find him, Sasuke watched her. Her skin was blistering from the acidic atmosphere, her chakra reserves were screaming, and her eyes were fixed solely on the space where he might appear. When the portal finally opened and she began to collapse, Sasuke caught her. It was an instinctual movement, a remnant of a boy who once sat on a pier in the moonlight. He held her waist, expecting the familiar heat of her gaze, the confession, or even the sob of relief. Instead, he felt her heart rate spike. Not with love, but with a visceral, jagged panic. She shoved him. It was a weak, trembling push, her hands barely having the strength to bunch his cloak. But the intent was a physical blow. "I'll thank you," she rasped, her voice a serrated blade of fury and exhaustion. She wouldn't even meet his eyes, staring instead at Naruto, who was fighting in the distance. "But you don't have to. Just go." Sasuke stood frozen for a fraction of a second. He had expected her wall to be a tantrum. He realized now it was a fortress. She wasn't fighting with him. She was fighting alongside him, for Naruto's dream and Kakashi's survival. As the infinite Tsukuyomi fell, and the world was trapped in its silken cocoons, Sasuke's resolve hardened. The 5 Kage were failures. The cycle of shinobi was a disease. He would be the cure, the singular shadow that took on the world's hatred. "I am going to execute the 5 Kage," Sasuke stated, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the battlefield. "And then, I will kill the tailed beasts." "Sasuke, stop it!" Naruto screamed, his voice thick with the grief of a brother betrayed yet again. "After everything? After we just saved the world together?" Sasuke ignored him, his Rinnegan fixed on the horizon. But then he heard the scrape of metal. Sakura stood a few paces away, a kunai trembling in her hand. Her face was a mask of agony, the stoicism she had maintained all through the war finally cracking. Tears began to track through the grime on her cheeks. "Sasuke," she called out, the way she said his name not as a fangirl but as a judge. "I'm gonna ask you again, for the last time, is this what you really want?" Sasuke looked at her. He saw the girl on the bridge. He saw the woman who had pushed him away in the desert. "Please," she whispered, a sound so low it was intended only for his ears, carried by a stray wind. "I'm here." For a heartbeat, the revolution faltered. "I'm here" wasn't just a statement of presence. It was an invitation to the home he had burned down. It was a plea to let the wall fall. "She still holds this feeling for me," he thought with a sudden, cruel clarity. "And that is why she must be silenced." "You really are annoying," Sasuke said, his voice devoid of the tremor in his heart. He didn't use a physical strike. He didn't want to feel her push him away again. He raised his eye, the tomo of the Rinnegan spinning. "Sasuke, no." Kakashi's voice was a scream of pure desperation. He lunged forward, but he was too slow, his own chakra exhausted. He watched in horror as his student, the girl he had tried so hard to protect from this very moment, was struck by the mental weight of Sasuke's killing intent. Naruto's reaction was a roar of primal betrayal. "You bastard! She just offered you everything." In the world of the genjutsu, Sasuke saw Sakura fall. In reality, she didn't even have time to scream. Her eyes went blank, the kunai slipping from her nerveless fingers and clattering onto the stone. She slumped forward, a puppet with its strings cut. "If she stayed," Sasuke said to the furious Naruto, his back turned to the wreckage of his team, "she would only get in the way of the blood that needs to be spilled. This is the only mercy I have left for her." He began to walk toward the valley of the end. He didn't look back at the girl in the dirt or the mentor who looked at him with pure shame. He had to be alone. If he felt the weight of her tears, he might not have the strength to kill the only friend he had left. The statues of Madara and Hashirama loomed over them like silent judges as the sky bled into a bruised purple. Sasuke stood atop the Uchiha's head, his Rinnegan cold, but his mind was a chaotic storm. "I'm here." Her whisper haunted him more than the roar of the waterfall. It wasn't the "I love you" of a girl seeking a hero. It was the final tether of a woman offering a bridge over an abyss. He had severed it with a genjutsu, yet the phantom weight of her presence felt like an anchor on his soul. "I told you, Naruto." Sasuke's voice cut through the spray of the falls. "I will become the darkness that unites the world. Your feelings, Sakura's tears, they are just remnants of a failed era. You're lying to yourself." Naruto screamed, standing on the water below, his golden chakra flaring into the massive form of the Kurama avatar. "You think cutting us off makes you strong? It just makes you a coward, Sasuke." Sasuke didn't answer with words. He unleashed his perfect Susanoo, the winged titan drawing its blade. The first exchange shattered the surrounding cliffs. The shockwaves stripped the trees bare for miles. Inside the amethyst armor, Sasuke's internal monologue was a jagged edge. "She pushed me away in the desert. She looked at me with fury, and yet she still offered her hand. Why won't she just let me go?" He lunged. Chidori clashed against Rasengan, the sound of 1,000 birds meeting the howling wind. They tumbled through the air, trading blows that could level mountains. Sasuke used his Ameno Tajikura to swap places with a stray pebble, appearing behind Naruto to deliver a kick that sent him spiraling into the stone. "Give it up!" Sasuke roared, his Susanoo channeling the chakra of the trapped, tailed beasts. He was becoming a god, yet he felt smaller than ever. Naruto intercepted a Susanoo arrow with a tailed beast ball, the explosion blinding the sun. "I will never give up, even if I have to beat some sense into you to make you see us." The battle devolved from grand avatars to a desperate, bloody brawl. Their chakra was spent. Their armor was gone. It was just two brothers in the mud, teeth bared, fists striking flesh. Sasuke's vision blurred. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sakura's face. Not the smiling girl from Team 7, but the woman with the kunai, the one whose heart rate spiked in panic when he touched her. He realized then that his mercy in the genjutsu wasn't for her sake. It was for his. He couldn't bear to see the look of pure, unadulterated disappointment in her eyes one more time. One final Chidori. One final Rasengan. The explosion consumed the valley. When the light faded, the statues were armless, the waterfall was silent, and the two of them lay side by side on the rubble, their blood mingling in the dust. Hours passed in a haze of agony until the sound of soft footsteps echoed against the stone. Sakura arrived. She looked like a ghost. Her clothes were torn, her face smeared with soot, and her eyes, usually so bright, were hollow. She looked at their missing arms, at the wreckage of the world they had nearly destroyed, and she looked defeated. She knelt between them. Her hands began to glow with a soft, green light as she pressed one to Sasuke's chest and the other to Naruto's. "Sakura," Naruto croaked, his voice full of a shaky, desperate relief. We settled it." She didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. Her focus was entirely on the surgical precision of the seal. Sasuke watched her from the corner of his eye. He waited for the lecture. He waited for her to scream at him, to tell him how much he had hurt her. But the silence was deafening. He saw a tear drop from her chin and splash onto his torn sleeve. She's starting to hate herself, Sasuke realized with a jolt of horror. She's hating herself for being here, for saving the man who just tried to erase her. "Sakura," Sasuke rasped, his pride finally crumbling into the red dirt. She didn't let him finish. She didn't want his apology yet. She just kept her head down, her shoulders shaking with a silent, rhythmic grief. She was healing his body, but her heart was miles away, locked behind that cold, thick wall she had built on the bridge. He had won the war against the world, but as he looked at the woman who refused to speak his name, Sasuke realized he had lost everything else.
If you're a true Naruto fan, hit that like button and subscribe for more anime stories.